Hi there, this is Janet Gerson Siegel, and I'm the Lonely Writer. This is serious social media help for the independent author. The independent author is defined as a writer who does not yet have an agent. All of this month, I'll be doing daily prompts for NaNoWriMo. Today's prompt is the word cold. Now, I happen to personally think this is a great prompt, if I may say so myself, because the word has just so many different connotations and you can take it in so many different directions. So now, what do we mean when we say someone is cold? Not something, but someone. Part of it might be about a question of unfriendliness, but it can also mean that someone is sexually uptight, that they might have hang-ups, that they're very rigid, not necessarily virginal. I mean, I think you can be cold and still have experienced sex, but it can kind of sort of give a connotation of somebody who only has one particular preference and will never deviate from it, doesn't do anything that's, shall we say, creative, all right? It can also be a bit about being removed. If you're cold, then you're sort of, I wouldn't say on the outside looking in, because that has a connotation of melancholy, of wanting to be part of the action. But I mean more like being an aloof and detached observer. I think that's a very different concept, where you intend to be separate. You're trying to be apart, as opposed to someone who's sort of got their nose pressed against the glass and really wants to be part of the action. But being cold also, of course, is about the thermometer. Now, can we look at cold a little bit differently? Let's look at some more connotations. Part of it is the cold of an icy winter. I live in New England, and we can have very snowy and cold winters, although often what will happen is that a winter that's extremely cold tends to not be very snowy and vice versa, and it's just because of humidity. But it's not always the case, because we do sometimes have a bit of both. But what feels cold to people in the tropics is very different from the way a New Englander feels when cold, and in particular when you get used to the cold. Because, I mean, I think what we all realize is that if you're living in an environment where maybe it's the summertime and you've had 90-degree weather for days and days, and then suddenly it's 50, it feels really cold. Whereas if you've been in 20-degree weather, and I apologize, I'm talking about Fahrenheit here, but if it's 20 degrees most of the time and then suddenly it's 50, it feels like, oh my God, it's suddenly spring. It feels warm, and you've got sort of this feeling of hope in there. So even though we've got objective measurements from a thermometer, what a mercury does, we also have very much the subjective feel of what we think is cold, and so there's a relative feeling to it. And then there's also certainly the cold of deep space, the alienness, and the starkness of black black air or black skies and white stars and gray debris. And so the coldness of deep space can feel really, really bone chilling, not just because it is quite literally very cold there usually, unless you're really close to a star. But it's also, there's also the sort of the coldness of being removed and being apart and being separate. That can be an extremely cold feeling. So my question, of course, is, what does cold mean to you? And I don't mean cool, hey man, cool kind of thing. I mean cold. It's a stark thing, and it's a superlative word. It's a word that's much farther on the spectrum than cool. So finally, this is Janet Gerson Siegel, and I'm the Lonely Writer, because an independent author never has to be alone. So thank you so much for listening, and good luck with NaNoWriMo.